This is the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your home for investment, economics, and geopolitics. For our publications and archives, go to goldnewsletter.com. Hello, folks. Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast. This is your host, Fergus Hodgson. Thank you for joining us. I have an incredible guest who's a wonderfully creative and innovative thinker, Michael Strong, with us today. We're going to discuss how to educate yourself and your children and to break the habits, perhaps, of orthodox education, or I'm not sure whether we want to say indoctrination, but the stifling status quo in education. Michael Strong is an educational entrepreneur, the co-founder of Co-School and other private and charter schools throughout the United States. He's leading a new one in California soon. The Co-School is in Austin, Texas. He's also the author of The Habit of Thought, From Socratic Seminars to Socratic Practice, which came, what year was that?
1997.
So you've been in this game a long time, Michael. Okay, so welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
And I should note that one of my other favorite shows, the Bob Zadek Show, had you on recently, and I highly recommend that show for anyone who wants to check it out. I will include a link to that earlier episode. But what inspired you or motivated you to devote your life to innovation or alternatives in education?
Well, I would say the simple version is I love learning and I hate school. I remember that as a student, I went to regular public school in Minnesota and then Aspen, Colorado, and you go along with the game because that's what you do. And then as last couple of years of school, I had some interesting discussion classes where we talked about ideas. And then in college and life, I found all sorts of different ways to learn. And then the other thing, in addition to learning becoming interesting and fun as an adult, is that I don't hang out with people that are jerks. In school, there are people that are jerks, and you're treated like crap. People take for granted, raise your hand to go to the restroom, but as an adult, you want to have to raise your hand to go to the restroom? It's ridiculous.
Michael, I hear you, mate. It's such a weird transition from conventional or regular education where you're forced into this group with people who are not savory or not polite. And then once you get out, you can choose. It's just this wonderful change. So just like you, the change has been enormous, and I have loved exploring the world and finding brilliant people to interact with or build relationships with. You love learning. You didn't find the regular education to be your place, or an appropriate place. And then how did that proceed in your life?
Well, so what I did is, after high school, I had great test scores and so forth, so I went to Harvard. But I discovered a small college called St. John's College with campuses in Santa Fe and Annapolis, where all classes are taught by means of Socratic discussions. And I was told I could get that at Harvard, but my freshman seminar at Harvard consisted of a graduate student dragging a small group of us through his dissertation. And it was not very boring. It was boring, not very authentic. And I had visited St. John's and loved the open dialogue there. And so I transferred to St. John's, graduated from there. 5 years later, I took a year off to travel Europe in between. And I love thinking and talking about ideas. That's what I do all day, every day. So in graduate school, I was in graduate school at the University of Chicago. I started initially offering to volunteer for Mortimer Adler's Paideia project in the 1980s. Adler had been part of this great book, Socratic Seminar Movement, and he was creating public school reform. And I was soon hired by them to provide Socratic seminar training to public school teachers. That led to a full-time job doing so in Alaska, training teachers in Socratic seminars. And after a while, we were on grant money. The grant money ran out. And parents loved what we were doing so much that a group of parents approached me and asked me to start a private school. Because if the public school...
Was this in Alaska? Still up there?
Yeah, this was in Anchorage. Oh. So, I was an accidental educational entrepreneur simply because parents loved it. If the public schools weren't providing it, they wanted to help myself and a few colleagues launch a school. So I knew nothing about business at the time. We had to create a budget. And I realized I had to figure out how people got paid. It's one of my pet peeves as a libertarian. They always say, intellectuals never had to meet a payroll, and it's absolutely true. As simple a function as going from working for an established institution to starting up your own business, you have to figure out how to pay people. So that ended up being a school called the Athenaeum School. After launching that, I was recruited to create a Montessori high school in San Antonio. Then I was recruited to create schools for highly gifted children in South Florida. Then I was recruited to create Montessori middle schools in Palo Alto and Pleasanton, California. And then I was recruited to create a charter high school based on Socratic principles in Angel Fire, New Mexico. So really, I was going to say, really by accident, I got myself established in this niche of intellectually high-end innovative education.
Michael, I love it, of course. I just think I wish there were many more Michael Strongs out there doing this, disrupting the status quo. So for people who are not specialists in education, what is a Montessori school, and do you still found schools by that name?
A great question. So, prior to joining the Montessori school in San Antonio, I didn't know. I'd heard the name, but Maria Montessori was the first female doctor in Italy over 100 years ago. Because it was a very chauvinistic society, they kind of pushed her off to the side. She ended up working with children with learning disabilities and really trying to study how they learned and how to help them learn more effectively. That led to a pilot school in a ghetto area of Italy where she created a school for the poor. And one of the things she did observationally was saw that children would stack pebbles up from smallest to largest and so forth. And she was a great observer of children. And her great invention is now known as the Montessori method, and people talk about the Montessori materials. But the real insight Montessori had was that learning is a matter of freedom within a structured environment or prepared or curated environment. And so what's interesting about that, and again, for your free market fans, we believe in freedom within a structure of rule of law. So it's not, Lord of the Flies style freedom, but Montessori classrooms set very specific parameters for what's allowed and what's not. But within those parameters, children can pick which work. So they have a 3-hour period every morning. One of the things Montessori does is really encourage independence. Anne Rand, by the way, was a big fan of Montessori education, wrote a brilliant essay on it. But children can pick, today do I want to work on reading or math or geography or grammar or whatever. And there are a series of sequenced lessons, but every adult should visit a Montessori preschool classroom because you see these 4-year-olds quite independently picking their work and quietly, rolling carpets on the floor, little carpets, and getting down to business. And then when they're done with their business, they pick it up and go and get another piece of work. And they're just like little adults. So for those of us who believe that life is about independence and responsibility, how much better is it from a very young age for children to take responsibility for their own learning and for children really to act as early as possible as responsible adults in a safe, prepared environment. And then by the time they become even adolescents, they are so much more mature. I think of conventional education as 13 years of training in passivity and dependence. Basically you're taught to sit in your chair, raise your hand, pay attention to what the teacher does. It's absolutely the opposite kind of education from empowered creators. So I'm all about developing schools where young people can become empowered, capable creators, and I hate schools where we have to be passive and dependent.
This term, Montessori and this lady's legacy, the new schools you're starting, you don't call them Montessori schools. And is that just because, I guess, your research or your understanding has moved beyond that at this point?
So I'm combining really two different traditions. So the Socratic seminar tradition of St. John's, and there are great books programs also at Columbia University and University of Chicago and several other places. I'm bringing the great book Socratic tradition down towards high schools and middle school. Montessori started with preschool and went up through elementary. She herself did no work on a secondary program. Several Montessori educators have seen my Socratic work as an appropriate secondary school sequel to her elementary work. In her elementary work, she emphasizes the physical independence of the child, picking their own work and setting up their own schedule in many ways. My work emphasizes the intellectual independence. So when I lead a Socratic discussion, I don't tell the students what to believe. I ask them questions about a text and have the expectation that they use textual evidence to justify their interpretation of the text. So whether we're reading, today in class we were reading some of Exodus, the Ten Commandments actually. Earlier we'd read Hammurabi's Code, and it's interesting to see how students compare the Ten Commandments to Hammurabi's Code. I don't tell them, there's no right answer. These are strange old cultures. It's interesting to see how different cultures did this. And we look at the evidence, whatever it is, and discuss it. And then they're expected to write papers afterwards in which they argue a thesis related to the Federalist Papers or Shakespeare or Toni Morrison or whatever.
I'm here in Guatemala, as you know. I'm just right nearby Francisco Marroquin University. And recently we had a presentation from Alfie Cohen. And to be frank, Michael, I did not find his presentation very compelling. It was called Too Much Achievement, Too Little Learning. And he was, I guess, contending that competition was a counterproductive force in education. My concern is that often competition for better grades or to achieve a higher level, I see it as facilitating a healthy, natural striving to be better or to do better. If students are just left to follow their own interests, how do you approach accountability, or students who perhaps show no enthusiasm for the material?
Oh, that's a great question. And I would say it's a weakness of the Alfie Cohen side of the territory, so to speak. And I want to go back to market metaphors. I really think that market metaphors are appropriate. Without rules and laws and accountability, if you don't pay a bill, you will be held accountable for not paying that bill one way or another.
Right.
And likewise, you do need a system of accountability. So it's freedom within structure is the key. To give a concrete example, we have our students at Co-School, and I am doing a 2.0 version of Co-School replication of sorts in San Francisco with some modifications. We require our students to set goals every year when they come in, and we have them set goals for their 20s. We have them set goals for graduation, goals for this year, this month, this week. We also, by the way, have them write a autobiography from the age of 100, so they're thinking about their whole life and what they're going to stand by, and we do that every year. So we really want them to think about their future, what they stand for, and so forth. Then once they've set their goals, and their parents obviously have input in the goals as well, then we hold them accountable for their goals. Most of our students, we use Khan Academy for math. It's independent, self-paced. We also have mathematical problem solving similar to math competitions and SAT math. But with respect to the linear math curriculum, they can choose to cover 2 years of math in 1 year, 1 year of math in 1 year, or half a year in math in 1 year, as long as it's okay with their parents. But if they don't meet their weekly goals, and then obviously that breaks down into how much math gets done each week, then they don't get to go out to lunch, for instance. Just like in the workplace, you're running late, you got to work through lunch. Yeah, our students have to work through lunch. So if they are consistently falling behind and cannot have a free lunch, then they have an incentive either to up their game or to change their goals. So we see our enforcement as enforcement of integrity. If you tell me you're going to do 2 years of math, I'm going to hold you accountable for that. But if that's not the goal you want to set, okay, let's go back to the goal setting process and renegotiate. But that way, it's completely transparent to everybody what the expectation is. And sometimes there are negotiations between parents and students on goals, but to a remarkable extent, parents like to have goals their students are bought into, and most students actually want to set goals that are in their best long-term interest and mostly satisfy their parents. And so once the student has set a goal, then we are a machine for helping them meet their accountability standards. And we're more in the role of coaches at that point, because if you're going to take an AP test at the end of the year, and we do have students preparing for the SAT and the AP advanced placement tests constantly, then we are helping you as a student to do well on that test. It's like an audition. One of my metaphors is American Idol. American Idol, you get real criticism if you don't sing well, and you get real validation if you do sing well. But it's an honest competition with honest judging, and you've chosen the game in which you want to be judged. And so we do have students who are, I say our students, about one-third academic, about one-third entrepreneurial, and about one-third creative. The academic ones, they're cranking up the SAT and AP scores to get into great colleges. Some of our entrepreneurial ones would rather start a real business than focus on college. They can still go to college, but their primary goal is going to be around, their business and getting X amount of sales or profitability by month 7 or whatever. So whatever it is, our role really is to set goals, align goals, and enforce those with integrity with the support of parents and students. And I think it's a wonderful system.
I'm envious of these students having this environment to explore or to challenge themselves. What do you say to people who are, like us, older, who we're not going to go back to high school again? What do we have to, what major myths about education do we have to unlearn?
That's a great question. I would say one of the first things is, for me personally, and I think for a lot of students, school is a matter of jumping through meaningless hoops. I was brilliant at memorize and forget tests. I remember at one point I had to memorize the parts of a frog for a biology test. I, studied the night before, got an A on the test, and I can't remember anything about that anymore. And for me, much of history, I got A's in history, but I'd remember it and forget it just for the test. So we want to make learning real and authentic. And if you are learning, suppose you want to start a new media channel, you want to start a new newspaper, you want to start SEO search company, whatever it is that you want to do, you realize you can't bullshit your way to success in the real world. It's not memorize and forget. It's you've got to show up and produce quality value day in, day out. So I think the most important thing is this notion that there's a curriculum. It's not about the curriculum, it's about performing. So you select the metrics on which you want to be measured, and you damn well better do a great job. There's a man named Cal Newport. He's a computer science professor who also does brilliant books on study hacks is his blog. But he talks about how to be a high school superstar and so forth. He has another book called Be So Good They Can't Ignore You. He's a big believer in the notion of deliberate practice, the kind of 10,000 hours, needs 10,000 hours to be great. So I believe that every student can be brilliant at something. There are people that are going to be better comedians than I could possibly be. For somebody else, it may be graphic design, user interface design, coding, whatever it is. It's best to be the best as you possibly can be with some kind of valuable skill in the workplace than to cover any curriculum. Now, I right now am working with a brilliant 7th grader who's way ahead in mathematics, and she's just beginning to be homeschooled. And what I telling her parents is forget the regular curriculum. Yes, let's get her to the point where she's world-class mathematics. I'd like to see her doing math competitions. But beyond that, let's have her do something really impressive. When I went to Harvard, the kid with the lowest SAT scores in my freshman class had been elected mayor of his small town in Michigan at the age of 18. If you can get a small town to elect yourself mayor, nobody cares about your SAT scores, your GPA. Basically, I think a lot of school metrics are basically garbage metrics. You have to be brilliant. I do want to say SAT is a good reading test, and math is a good math test. So if you're going to go into reading or academics, you need great SAT scores in general. But if your thing is to be the best videographer, you need to be a world-class videographer. We had one student go to Parsons School of Design in New York, and he had been working as an assistant to a Wired magazine professional photographer, doing professional photo shoots much of his senior year. And if you want to be a great photographer, apprentice to a great photographer. The academics become much less important. So if I had a child who's an adolescent, I do have 2 kids. They're grown. They're happy. Well. But I would say let's figure out how to make you be absolutely kick-ass in something, and let's please the institutions as a secondary feature.
You might not know, Michael, but I taught economics in New Zealand for a couple of years. I was horrified by the regular curriculums or the national curriculums, and I would say to my students that we could learn this in 2 weeks if you guys would just focus, and we wouldn't be taking the role or going to assemblies. But then I said, I don't even want to teach you the curriculum because it's not written by economists of any fine caliber. And I was just appalled that parents and people in the wider community were so focused on the test scores. I just thought this is meaningless, but apparently that's a common problem. So you say, yes, so first, don't get too tied up in conventional curriculums, perhaps. Much of the attention of late in popular media has been on higher education, and I guess you've focused more on elementary and high school. Do you have plans in the works to take on the universities or colleges?
That's a great question. And so first I would be a little bit more granular. I'm very critical of the universities, but right now the only two universities that provide, or the only ways in which universities provide a decent return on investment is if you're in a STEM field. So if you want to be an engineer, it's still great to get an engineering degree, or if you go to elite university. So you go to Harvard, get an English major, and work for McKinsey, you're okay. But most other degrees at this point provide a negative ROI, especially if you include the opportunity cost. So not just the tuition, but also opportunity costs of 4 years. So I'm a big fan of looking at ways to beat the system. We can also talk about the political correct insanity. You can talk about the all the nonsense, the ideological curriculum and so forth. So what I'm very interested in doing is supporting our graduates, right now our graduates from co-school and so forth, in finding alternative paths. And so I want to be very clear with students on where they'll need a degree. And so, for instance, in certain kinds of fields, such as medicine, anything that's regulated by the state, they'll need a degree. And in other ways, I am much more interested in helping students, including our graduates, become world-class performers. Because if you don't need a degree, I think you need to become a world-class performer, and that doesn't require a degree. Just on the specifics of starting a university, it costs about $1 million to become an accredited university. I've researched this, and so we would need significant funding to become an accredited university. There are also lots of liberal arts colleges that are going broke. And so another strategy is to take over a dying liberal arts college.
Yeah, I agree, actually. That seems like a smarter way to go.
Exactly. There are a lot of universities that are going bankrupt, and more will as the baby boom echo dies down. So there is the option of taking over one of these universities, and people in my network are very actively looking for such opportunities, but it still requires a significant injection of cash. So, and then in many cases, you have to fight the faculty. So in some ways, I would say it's just much easier to enter the secondary market and then extend that organically into a 13th year and a 14th year, and really focus on placing young people in good jobs or preparing them for a professional life rather than focus on a degree per se.
This episode is sponsored by the New Orleans Investment Conference and Gold Newsletter. For over 40 years, investors have relied on both of these institutions to get timely intelligence from the world's top experts and to discover tomorrow's biggest winners in metals and mining. Visit NewOrleansConference.com and GoldNewsletter.com to learn more.
I guess I should note that I am studying at a very distinctive university here in Guatemala, started by a man, I guess, of like mind who wanted to have a distinct or a pioneering institution, but it has been a very long and a costly road. It's been an uphill battle. So if you want to get a swifter results, yes, it seems like the elementary and high school levels offer much more fertile or low-hanging fruit in that regard. Okay, so you're working on a new school. Why don't you plug that one before we round up? What's going on in San Francisco?
So I'm working with Higher Ground Education, which is the most successful managers of for-profit Montessori schools in the U.S., and they have hired me to take what I've built at Co-School and provide an upgraded version for the San Francisco market. So it will be heavily Socratic, heavily entrepreneurial. We will provide students with pathways to elite universities, to creative professions, and to entrepreneurship. As a launch strategy, the students will have the kind of respect and freedom that we give them at Co-School. And the idea is to provide this sort of very much, you're responsible for your own education, we're going to coach you to become the best human being you can, in the most interesting education market in the world, which I would say San Francisco is.
And many people have been maybe turned off by conventional education, but would like to either educate themselves or be involved, like you, as an innovator, as someone, as a leader in the field. One, how can they follow you? And two, are there, maybe you want to mention some organizations that offer a pathway for people who want to be educational leaders or teachers, but are not satisfied with the regular or the state designated pathways?
No, that's a great question. I would say first to follow me. The easiest way is to follow me on Facebook. You can find me through CoSchool or through Michael Strong. My Senegalese wife is a beautiful Magat Wade, so I'm the one with the beautiful Senegalese wife.
Sure,
I'm also launching a media channel called Original Path, and Original Path will be for parents, teachers, and students who are interested in liberating from the existing system. I should have an early version of that launched in about a month, and that's precisely for the purposes you're describing. So anybody can participate in liberating themselves and others from the existing system.
Excellent, Michael. Thanks for what you do, and best wishes for this new school. I look forward to seeing it grow in the coming years, okay?
Thanks. Good to catch up, Fergus. Take care.